Hey Reddit, this is a long and difficult story about how my dad's obsession with funeral attire led to uncovering dark family secrets. I need to get this off my chest. I'm James, 32M, and this all started when my granddad passed away last month. Dad, 58M, called me about the funeral arrangements and what I planned to wear. I told him my usual funeral outfit, black pants, white shirt, and my dark gray coat that I've worn to every funeral for the past 5 years. It's a well-made wool coat that I spent good money on, and honestly looks almost black unless you're really looking at it in direct sunlight. Dad immediately got upset about the coat. Not just mildly annoyed, but genuinely angry. He kept saying everyone would be wearing black and it looked stupid and disrespectful in gray. I tried explaining that it's a perfectly appropriate formal coat, but he wouldn't listen. Some background on my dad: he's always been obsessed with appearances, especially at family events. Growing up, everything had to be perfect. He'd make us change clothes multiple times before family gatherings, taking photos to analyze if our outfits matched properly. My mom Sarah, 56F, used to joke that he cared more about how we looked in family photos than how we actually felt at events. But there was always something especially weird about how he acted around funerals. He'd get extremely stressed about what everyone wore, creating detailed lists of acceptable colors and styles. Mom said this behavior started after his own father's funeral 30 years ago, but she never explained why. As kids, we just accepted it as one of Dad's quirks. When I explained I couldn't afford to spend 40 to 50 pounds on a new coat right before Christmas, especially being a week away from payday, Dad completely lost it. He called me selfish, said I was deliberately trying to embarrass the family, and hung up on me. This was surprising because while Dad could be controlling about clothes, he'd never blown up at me like this before. The next morning, Dad showed up at my house unannounced with a brand new black coat. He tried forcing me to take it, saying I had to wear it or I'd embarrass the family. When I refused, telling him I didn't need charity and my gray coat was perfectly fine, he broke down crying. Not normal tears, but full-on hysterical sobbing. He kept repeating, "You don't understand, you have to wear black, everything has to be black." I tried calming him down, but he just got more agitated. He started rambling about his father's funeral, saying something about photos and family shame. It was honestly scary seeing him like this. Dad's usually very composed and proper. I'd never seen him lose control like this before. Mom called me later that night, upset that I'd triggered what she called Dad's funeral anxiety. She begged me to just wear the coat to keep peace in the family. When I pushed back, saying Dad's behavior wasn't normal and he needed help, she got defensive. She said there were things about the family history I didn't understand, but insisted it wasn't her story to tell. Growing up, money was always tight in our family. Dad worked as an accountant at my grandfather's company, and while we weren't poor, we definitely weren't wealthy either. Mom was a teacher but had to quit when my sister Amy, 29F, was born with health issues. So Dad's insistence that I buy a new coat I couldn't afford really bothered me. The day before the funeral, Dad showed up again. This time he brought Uncle Pete, 60M, his older brother, probably hoping he could convince me. Uncle Pete tried reasoning with me about the coat while Dad paced in the background like a caged animal. When I still refused, saying I wouldn't spend money I didn't have on a coat I didn't need, Uncle Pete pulled me aside and told me something that changed everything. Apparently, at my grandfather's funeral 30 years ago, my dad wore a gray coat despite his mother insisting on black. Someone took photos of the funeral party and sent them to the local newspaper. This was back when small town papers regularly published funeral photos. Those photos revealed something the family had tried to keep hidden. My grandfather had a whole second family, and they were all at the funeral too, wearing black. The gray coat made my dad stand out in the photos, which led to people noticing and asking questions. The story spread through our small town like wildfire. The scandal nearly destroyed our family. Grandmother had known about the second family but kept quiet to avoid shame. The photos forced everything into the open. Dad blamed himself for wearing gray, convinced that if he'd worn black like everyone else, the secret would have stayed buried. This explains so much about Dad's obsession with funeral attire, but I still think he's being irrational. The news would have come out eventually, and his gray coat wasn't really to blame. Plus, this was 30 years ago, surely we can move past it now. I'm shocked and confused by all of this. None of us younger family members ever knew about grandfather's second family. Dad's obsession suddenly makes more sense, but I still think he's letting past trauma control him. The funeral is tomorrow and I don't know what to do. My gray coat isn't going to reveal any secret families this time. Mom's still begging me to wear black, saying Dad's fragile right now with grandfather's death bringing up old memories. Amy thinks I should stand my ground. Uncle Pete just looks worried and keeps saying he should have told me this story years ago. I need outside perspective here. Am I wrong for refusing to buy a new coat just to manage Dad's irrational fears? Should I give in to keep peace in the family? The gray coat is perfectly appropriate for a funeral, and I really can't afford a new one right now. Update 1: The funeral happened and I wore my gray coat despite all the drama. Dad barely spoke to me throughout the service, just kept giving me these wounded looks like I'd personally betrayed him. Mom stuck close to him the whole time, running interference whenever other family members tried to approach us. What I didn't expect was the reaction from our elderly relatives. Several of them kept giving me strange looks and whispering to each other during the service. I noticed Great Aunt Helen, 82F, and her sister Margaret, 79F, particularly seemed agitated, constantly glancing at my coat and then quickly looking away when they caught my eye. After the service, during the reception at the family home, Great Aunt Helen approached me. She was clearly shaken, her hands trembling as she pulled me aside into grandfather's old study. She asked if I wore the gray coat as a message. When I looked confused, she seemed even more distressed. That's when she dropped a bombshell. Apparently, grandfather had written a second will just months before his death. The family solicitor had contacted them last week about it, but Dad had somehow convinced everyone to keep it quiet until after the funeral. The second will supposedly contain significant changes to the inheritance structure. Here's where it gets weird. According to Aunt Helen, after the scandal with the secret family 30 years ago, wearing gray to family funerals became a sort of silent protest symbol in our family. Some relatives who'd sided with grandfather's second family had deliberately worn gray to subsequent funerals as a way of showing their position in the family rift. By coincidentally wearing gray, I'd unknowingly signaled to the older generation that I knew about the second will and was making some kind of statement. Several relatives now think I'm involved in some sort of conspiracy. They believe I somehow knew about the will changes and wore gray as a deliberate act of defiance against Dad. Dad's behavior has gotten increasingly erratic since the funeral. Mom called me in tears yesterday saying he's become obsessed with going through old family photos, muttering about patterns and signs. He's convinced himself that my grandfather must have told me something before he died, that my gray coat wasn't a coincidence. Uncle Pete visited me at work today, clearly worried. He said Dad's been calling him late at night, rambling about family loyalty and betrayal. Dad's apparently convinced that grandfather told me family secrets and the gray coat was my way of declaring allegiance to some rival family faction. I tried explaining to everyone that this was literally just about not being able to afford a new coat, but no one seems to believe me. The coincidence is too perfect in their minds. Even Amy called me asking if I was keeping secrets from her, saying she'd heard rumors about the second will from our cousins. The solicitor has called a family meeting for next week to discuss grandfather's estate. Dad tried to get it postponed, claiming he needed more time to prepare documents, but the solicitor insisted. Uncle Pete thinks Dad knows something about the will that he's trying to hide. Mom's barely holding it together. She called me again this morning, this time revealing that Dad hasn't been sleeping, staying up all night going through grandfather's old business papers. She's worried he might be having some sort of breakdown. The whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. What started as a simple disagreement about a coat has somehow snowballed into this massive family crisis. Old rivalries and resentments from the original scandal 30 years ago are resurging. Everyone's taking sides and making assumptions. Several cousins who'd previously been distant have suddenly started reaching out, trying to subtly probe if I know anything about the will. Even people I haven't spoken to in years are suddenly interested in having lunch and catching up. I'm stuck in the middle of all this with no idea what's really going on. I honestly didn't know anything about a second will or gray coats being some sort of family protest symbol. But now I'm somehow at the center of what feels like an emerging family civil war. The family meeting is in 5 days. Mom's begging me to stay away, saying Dad needs time to calm down. Uncle Pete thinks I need to be there to clear things up. Amy wants to come with me for support. And through all of this, I still have no idea what's actually in this mysterious second will that's causing so much chaos. I'll update again after the family meeting. Given how things have gone so far, I'm honestly dreading what might come out next. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we discovered grandfather had a third family hidden away somewhere. And yes, I'm planning to wear the gray coat to the meeting. If everyone already thinks I'm making a statement, I might as well commit to it. Update 2: the family meeting at the solicitor's office was even worse than I expected. All the main family members were there, me, Amy, Mom, Dad, Uncle Pete, and several aunts and uncles. The tension in the room was unbearable as we waited for the solicitor to begin. The second will revealed something huge. Grandfather had set up substantial trust funds for me and Amy, completely separate from the main estate. We're talking about significant money here, enough that neither of us would ever need to worry about buying new coats again. The trusts had been established 5 years ago, with strict conditions that they couldn't be accessed by anyone else in the family. But it was grandfather's letter, attached to the will, that really blew everything up. He wrote that he discovered concerning irregularities in the company's finances during an audit. He didn't directly accuse anyone, but he mentioned being worried about history repeating itself, referencing his own past mistakes with his second family. Dad exploded when the solicitor finished reading. He started shouting that I must have known about this all along, that the gray coat was proof I'd been conspiring with grandfather behind his back. His face was bright red, veins bulging in his neck as he ranted about family loyalty. Then, in his rage, he let something slip that stunned everyone. He'd been embezzling money from grandfather's company for years. The words just tumbled out as he was yelling about betrayal. The whole room went silent. Uncle Pete was the first to react. He stood up and confronted Dad, demanding to know how much had been taken. That's when the whole ugly truth came out. Dad had a gambling addiction. He'd been stealing from the company to cover his debts, hoping to access grandfather's estate before anyone discovered the missing money. Mom broke down crying and admitted she'd known about the gambling for years. She'd been helping cover it up, writing checks from their personal accounts to temporarily fill holes in the company books when audits came up. That's why money was always tight growing up. Dad's gambling had drained their savings. The black coat only rule at funerals wasn't just about the old scandal with the second family. Mom had been enforcing it too, desperate to avoid anything that might draw attention to our family. She was terrified someone would start asking questions about their finances. The solicitor immediately called a break and stepped out to make some calls. Uncle Pete took control of the situation, preventing Dad from leaving. Aunt Helen started crying, saying she'd suspected something was wrong with the company finances but never wanted to believe it. Amy was in shock beside me. We'd grown up thinking we were just a normal middle-class family struggling a bit with money. Finding out our childhood financial stress was because Dad was gambling away company money hit hard. The trust funds grandfather set up suddenly made more sense. He must have noticed money missing during that audit and realized what Dad was doing. Instead of confronting him directly, he quietly set up protection for his grandchildren. Dad's still insisting I somehow knew about all of this, that I wore the gray coat to deliberately trigger this revelation. He can't accept that this was all just a coincidence about not being able to afford a new coat. Even facing criminal charges for embezzlement, he's more focused on my supposed betrayal than his own actions. The police were called. Uncle Pete, as a company director, had no choice but to formally report the theft. Dad was asked to surrender his passport. The family's been torn apart, some supporting Dad and believing his conspiracy theories about me and grandfather, others horrified by his actions and the years of deception. Mom's staying with her sister for now. She can't face coming home to their house knowing all their financial struggles were because of Dad's gambling, not legitimate business problems like he claimed. The solicitor's putting together paperwork to formally remove Dad from any involvement with grandfather's estate. Uncle Pete's hired forensic accountants to go through the company books. They think Dad's theft could go back over a decade. Everything's changed. A simple disagreement about a coat somehow unraveled decades of family secrets and lies. I still can't quite believe how it all came out. Update 3: Everything completely fell apart after Dad's confession at the solicitor's office. The forensic audit revealed he'd stolen nearly £800,000 from the company over 12 years. He's now facing multiple criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. His court date is set for next month, and his lawyer is pushing for a plea deal. Mom finally filed for divorce after admitting the full extent of Dad's gambling had been worse than anyone knew. The family house had been remortgaged 3 times to cover his debts. She'd been quietly selling her jewelry and working extra tutoring jobs for years to keep up with bills, all while helping him hide the theft from the company. She moved in with her sister and is slowly rebuilding her life. The trust fund grandfather set up for me and Amy turned out to be worth £1.2 million each. We've used some of the money to help Mom get back on her feet, buying her a small flat and setting up an account for her daily expenses. She keeps apologizing for not telling us the truth sooner, but I understand she was trapped in a horrible situation. Dad still calls sometimes, usually late at night when he's been drinking. His messages swing between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of orchestrating his downfall. He's convinced grandfather told me about the theft before he died, and that the gray coat was some sort of signal to the family. I've blocked his number, but he keeps calling from different phones. The company survived, barely. Uncle Pete had to lay off several employees and take out loans to cover the holes Dad left in the finances. 3 of our cousins who worked there lost their jobs. Family gatherings are now split, with people choosing sides between those who support Dad and those who've cut him off completely. Aunt Helen passed away last month. At her funeral, I noticed several relatives deliberately wearing gray coats. The old symbol of protest has taken on new meaning. Now it represents standing against Dad's betrayal of the family trust. Uncle Pete reached out recently, saying Dad's finally seeking help for his gambling addiction. Apparently, he's joined a support group and wants to meet with me to explain everything. He sent a long letter talking about how the pressure of following in grandfather's footsteps at the company drove him to gambling, how he always felt inadequate after the scandal with the second family. I'm not ready to see him. Some betrayals run too deep to fix. Finding out my childhood memories of financial struggle were because of his gambling and theft, not legitimate hardship, has changed how I view everything about my upbringing. Amy's handling it differently. She's agreed to meet Dad, saying she needs closure. Mom's supportive of her choice but understands why I can't do the same yet. I still wear my gray coat to formal occasions. It's become a reminder that sometimes standing your ground, even over something seemingly small, can bring hidden truths to light. The family's permanently split over everything that happened, but at least we're done with secrets and lies. And yes, I did finally buy a black coat. It's hanging in my closet with the tag still on. I'll probably never wear it. Some symbols become too powerful to give up. The whole experience has taught me that family secrets never stay buried forever. Sometimes it takes something as simple as a gray coat to unravel decades of deception.